So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker tonight, Andrea Linsky. I'll get you to put your hand up, Andrea. She's a senior environmental project manager for the city of Edmonton. Her focus area is energy and greenhouse gas management, energy incentive program design, and public policy development. She's a professional chemical engineer, a certified energy manager, and has a master's of education. Her experience includes building controls and automation for energy management training, renewable energy systems applications, alternative energy product development, demand-side management projects, and she was involved in the implementation of the city's greenhouse gas management plan and aspects of the city's energy transition plan, both of which were targeted at making civic operations greener. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming Andrea.
Thank you for that warm welcome. I'm going to set a timer on myself here, so just to keep myself in line. All right. Great. So I'm going to start by setting the context here. We have a three-woman panel, which is kind of wonderful, in my opinion, tonight, looking at City of Edmonton going solar. And my piece of the puzzle today will be specifically on the context and rationale behind why the City of Edmonton is doing what it's doing. And then both Jenny and Robin will be introduced, and they'll be talking about first what the city is specifically doing, and then what programs we're offering to the City of Edmonton as a community at large, the remainder of everyone. So without further ado, climate action in Edmonton is really a two-piece puzzle, and I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those pieces. We are part of City Environmental Strategies at the City of Edmonton, and in City Environmental Strategies we focus on two things. We talk about mitigation and adaptation around climate change. And so I'm going to set a little bit of context around the adaptation side first, and then we'll get into the mitigation side, because the mitigation side is where solar primarily resides when we start talking about things at the city. That being said, there is definitely a role for solar applications in adaptation to climate change. So at the City of Edmonton, as you can imagine, it doesn't make sense to only address one of the two areas. We actually have two separate teams that work very closely together, and we are working on the mitigation side as a big piece, and then also the adaptation side when it comes to, okay, well, what are we going to do if we can't reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as much as we know we need to stay within a 2 degree or a 1.5 degree Celsius future. So most recently at the city, we've actually approved an adaptation strategy and action plan for adaptation, climate change adaptation rather than mitigation. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit about what that has been about, because I think it really helps people understand why it's so important to be doing things like solar. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted, as they say, but I think these are some interesting findings that we've had. So we've recently done some modeling that is Edmonton specific. So a lot of people hear about climate change, the effects of climate change and how it's going to impact the world. And we hear about things like food patterns changing, and we'd hear about climate change refugees, things like that. But what we wanted to do as a city is look at how is it actually going to impact the city of Edmonton, and within our geographic boundaries in a lot of ways. So some of the modeling has looked at one thing in particular that's interesting is looking at the heating in our city. So we're actually going to have, right now, between 1961 and 1990, we would see about 1 day a year of plus 30 weather. In the summer, I'm sure most of you can think of those days, and I'm not one that loves hot weather, so I don't think of them fondly. But if we're looking at the future, and this is what our modeling did, we said, okay, well, what's going to happen if as we move forward to between 2041 and 2070? And we're looking at 15 plus days of plus 30 weather. So that's significantly more than we're used to. And if we move forward even more, after 2071, we're looking at 33 plus days of really hot weather. So that's significant change in the way that we deal with heat in our city. With that comes some different aspects, changing ecosystems. So this is actually an image here of our river valley now. We're in a boreal forest area. We'll likely be moving towards grasslands. It's a radical shift in the way things look. We're going to be having changing precipitation patterns in Edmonton, so warmer, wetter winters. I have spent the last 10 years of my life in Vancouver, so I sort of think that direction. And hotter, drier summers, as I just talked about with the temperature rises. And then the other piece is changing weather extremes. So when we talk about those once in 100-year storms, they're going to be happening a lot more frequently than once in 100 years. So this is some of the modeling that we've done around adaptation. Not only have we figured out what's going to be happening in the future, but we've also looked at how that's going to financially impact us. So some of the modeling is looking at around $3 billion of cost to our GDP as a city on direct impact of global warming on the city. So some of that will be around, usually that's direct cost to our actual city in infrastructure. And then also what I found very interesting is around 22,000 health incidents predicted to increase because of this. And most of those are actually heat related. I assumed automatically it would be forest fire smoke, but that's not considered within the city's boundaries. So it's actually things like heat from those hot days. So all of this to say, mitigation is really important, right? That we are definitely looking at the things that we're going to have to do around adaptation if we don't manage to reduce our emissions enough as a globe, because we know it's not a localized issue. But mitigation is a big piece of that, and so that's why the city spends so much time on mitigation. I should say, though, I was in an interesting meeting just the other day where we started looking at adaptation from the side of, obviously we're looking at what it means, but it also means what we need to do. And so solar will actually play a part of that discussion and how we figure out climate resiliency. Like, how are we going to deal with these storms who are going to be causing issues with our electrical grid? And obviously solar will be a big part of that discussion. So if we look at the mitigation side of things, we actually have 3 big goals for the city as a whole. That's all of you included if you live and work within our boundaries. The first is to reduce community-based greenhouse gas emissions by 35% by 2035. Sorry, 35% by 2035. And with that, we're looking at energy efficiency, so reduce energy consumption by 25% per person, so each one of you by 2035. And then energy resilience is really where the solar side of things falls into, which is generating 10% of our Edmonton's electricity locally. That's within our boundaries by 2035. So these are some pretty ambitious goals, which I think are pretty exciting. So how do we get to this? How do we get to these goals? I think this is something that's important to understand. So the City of Edmonton has the Way We Green, which is our environmental and sustainability overarching policy programming at the city. From that, we actually developed something called the Energy Transition summary document. These are all available online and very interesting, although lengthy reads for those of you who are interested in more of this. That piece of literature it was then socialized, and this is what I find unbelievably fascinating. I don't know if any of you were part of this, possibly some of you were, but we actually took some significant, very significant action items to a panel of your peers. So they were Edmontonians from a very diverse group of very diverse group of Edmontonians, I should say, where we had them come in to a series of sessions and talk about what energy transition in Edmonton could look like. when we say diverse, we mean many different types of diversity, but we also mean very differing opinions on climate change as well, which is kind of interesting. And at the end of this discussion, we actually came out of it with an agreement that led to a unanimous agreement that the City of Edmonton should be taking the necessary steps to get to a low-carbon city by 2050. So regardless of how people felt about climate change, they still thought that the pieces of the action items that we had in there made sense for fiscal reasons, for all sorts of different reasons, which I think is pretty powerful, and it's a really strong message to be able to take to the community, regardless of what your beliefs are. So what I should also say, though, is that this led to the City of Edmonton's energy transition strategy. And the energy transition strategy itself is a lovely list of actions for us as community members, as corporate members of the community, and as a city operation administration as well. And I highly suggest you take a read of it. But that has led to a lot of the work that we're going to talk about today, both within our city operations, but all the programming and the stuff that we do with the community to try and get us a little bit closer to solar. So the other thing I should mention, actually, this set of series, the discussions that we did with all of the different diverse Edmontonians, that was back in 2013. It was a while ago. So people always say, well, what about now? Like, what's happened? How have things changed? This stat I really like. It was just from a survey that we did last year in 2018. And basically, what it says is that, I want to make sure I have it exactly right, 73% of Edmontonians, based on this survey we did, believe that climate change is something to be very concerned about. So that's a significant amount of people in Edmonton who are on board with this discussion. The more interesting thing, in my opinion, is that 43% of Edmontonians believe that most Edmontonians are concerned with climate change. So that means we are concerned, but we don't think our neighbors are, right? And so that's a very interesting sort of social anomaly that I'm hoping we can bust, because if we realize we're all on the same team, we can probably do a lot more, right? So that all to be said, the city is actually doing quite a few different things around the energy transition plan. We're focusing on energy use in buildings, energy use, generation of electricity and heat, energy use in industry, land use and transportation development, water and waste, water treatment, waste reduction and recycling, and the big piece that you're going to hear about from Jenny today is on the leadership side. How is the city leading by example in all of this? And so these are some of the areas that we're focusing on. The other piece that I wanted to talk to you about is how we're engaging with the residential world, and not just residential, but the commercial world as well. Robin will dig into the programs a lot more, but we have Change for Climate. How many of you have heard of Change for Climate before? That's great. That's a lot more than I was expecting. So the website and the resources that we have are really quite powerful and interesting. And one of the pieces here is that we have a list of different actions that you can take as individuals towards change for climate. And you can actually go through and choose ones that you think fit you and your lifestyle and the things you're doing, and come up with a plan, essentially. So I highly suggest you take a look at the website. These are just some of the ones that we actually have here. And solar is definitely a big player in this discussion. The other thing that we have is stories about change in Edmonton, and I think this is particularly interesting for people who may think that we're not moving as fast as we should be here, but I think we are. The renewable series. How many of you have heard about that series? Okay, again, that's great. This is a series of videos that are around 7-ish minutes long that talk about some of the fantastic change agents and the change projects that have been happening in the city around renewables. And they're very, very well done. They're actually award-winning video series, so I highly suggest that you watch them tonight in bed on your cell phone before you go to bed. All right, so to start here, we also have some other videos called Tiny Explanations. And in this one in particular, is our solar tiny explanation. So I thought I would show it for you, being the solar presentation today. And I think most of this will not be new to you. If you are interested in solar, this is not rocket science. But it's an example of how we're trying to make this more accessible to Edmonton at large. So let's see if I can get this to work. Oops, that's the wrong one.
And now a tiny explanation of how you can get solar on your home. Solar keeps getting more popular and the price keeps dropping. And maybe all that change has you wondering, what would it take to add solar panels to my roof? How does it work? Think of solar panels like a mini power plant that, instead of coal or gas, uses the sun to power your home, which is good news. Alberta is statistically one of the sunniest places in the world. Statistics. It's important to understand that most people with solar are still connected to the grid. That means they always have access to power, even at night and in winter. But when the sun is shining, the panels power your home, and when it's really shining, that whole "your house is a power plant" thing takes on a new meaning. The excess energy that your cells produce feeds back into the grid, and you get credit on your bill. Great! Free energy from the sun with a backup system during the night. The stability of the grid with less resources used to produce electricity than the old-fashioned way. So how do I get that sweet, sweet solar panel goodness on my roof? First thing you do is contact a solar installer. The first thing they'll do is ask for your energy bills from the past year and your address. They'll look up your location and run an analysis on your home, seeing what kind of sun and shade you get. Your installer will crunch the numbers to figure out your energy needs and to figure out the best mounting options for your roof. The panels work well on wall installations and non-south facing walls, but they perform best when facing south. And they should perform pretty well. Alberta is statistically one of the sunniest places in the world. Did we already say that? After providing a quote and picking installation dates, the installer will take care of your permitting and add 3 key items to your lovely home. The racking system on the roof, the photovoltaic panels that mount to it, and the inverter that turns solar energy into usable power. The inverter connects directly into your circuit breaker box and delivers power onto the grid that already flows through your home. It's also wirelessly connected to a monitoring system that will alert you or your installer if there are any issues up on the roof. It will even tell you the amount of power you're producing at any moment. Your energy provider will add a 2-way meter to your home to calculate how much is being pulled from the grid and how much excess you're adding to the grid. The excess gives you a credit, and the reduction of energy pulled from the grid plus the credit helps pay off the system. Kind of a cool way to see how much power these panels are pumping out. And it could be a lot. Alberta is one of the sunniest places in the world. If only we had numbers to back that up. And that is a tiny explanation of how you can get solar on your home. Always remember that not all installers are the same, and it's important to do your research to make sure they're the right fit for you. For a comprehensive list of solar tips, visit changeforclimate.ca/solar.
Great. We also, I should mention, have these tiny explanation sheets. So, we talk a lot about, we have a ton of tiny explanations. So feel free to use these in your communications with anyone if you're ever talking about this type of work. So one of the things that I also wanted to talk about quickly was our climate modeling. And so this is actually some groundbreaking work that's just come out of the city of Edmonton. In fact, I don't know how much we have publicly published yet, so you might just be hearing it from me at this point. But we've actually done some very interesting modeling to say, okay, what is it going to look like if the city of Edmonton is going to stay within a 1.5 degree Celsius future. And for anyone who's worked in the field of greenhouse gas management, you know that usually that's not the way we look at things. We look at things from the complete opposite way, where we say, how much are we actually producing right now, greenhouse gas-wise, as a city, and what do we think we can shave off? What kind of things can we do to reduce our emissions? The city said, we've done a lot of modeling, and Jenny will talk about a bit of that, but we've done a lot of modeling on that side of things. We're saying, let's look at it from the other side. The scientists say we have to stay within a 1.5 degree future. How are we going to do that? Let's go from the bottom up. And the really interesting thing here has been a whole bunch of work. I don't know if any of you heard about the IPCC Climate Change, Cities and Climate Change Conference that was here recently this spring, but the scientists engaged in that helped us look at a carbon budget. So we said, okay, how much carbon can the entire world produce and still stay within a 1.5 degree future? Then let's break it down city by city to how much each city is allowed to produce. And it was done in a very, I don't know the details of the modeling, but essentially it's done in a very interesting way that allows for some of the more developing areas to emit more than some of the developed areas. And cities like Edmonton, we also take into consideration our climate zones as well, right? So it's done relatively fairly. It's not just a per capita base assessment. The city of Edmonton then was given a total amount of tons that we are allowed to work with. And so Edmonton has 2,500 gigatons of carbon that we are allowed to emit if we're still going to stay within this 1.5 degree future. Sadly, we've already used 1,900 of them. So we've got only 600 gigatons left worth of carbon that we can emit in the future. And so that was a really interesting way for us to look at that. And so from that, now we've gone and done our modeling. So what do we have to change and what do we have to do to get us there? This is it. So as of now, we're up here, and over the next 20 years or so, we have a significant amount of reductions that need to be done. It's a somewhat frightening curve, but at the same time, our modeling is showing that it's possible. Like, this isn't something that is we just shut down the city of Edmonton and walk away, right? This is actually feasible with being very progressive with a lot of the work that we're doing. So I'm not going to get into too much more of the details, but essentially we're going to be working on this now at the city. Now that we've got the modeling, we've got the interesting, we know how many gigatons that we have left, and we'll go from there. So I mentioned earlier one of the areas also that we're working on, and this is a big part of that low carbon future, is low carbon lifestyles and communities through urban planning. We have a transportation master plan that's being worked on right now that takes a look at things like LRT and the bike lanes to help reduce our emissions from vehicles in the city. And we also have new communities like Blatchford that are going to be impacting the city in a very different way. And actually, the most recent renewable video talks a little bit about the Blatchford project, so that might be one to start with tonight. But Blatchford is actually a large infill development that's going to be at the old airport site right here downtown. And it's going to be an extremely sustainable community, looking at just using both district energy and solar to make it as efficient as possible. So it's actually a very interesting project, and I invite you to learn more. There's often events at the city talking about Blatchford and information online as well. So I think I'm about to run out of time here. What I did want to tell you is that we actually have quite a few different programs that we are working on at the city, both from the solar realm of things, but also on energy efficiency. And so I'm just going to touch on two energy efficiency related programs that are for the commercial audiences out there. So if any of you work for companies in the city of Edmonton, you should ask your employers if they're part of these programs. The first one is the Corporate Climate Leaders Program, where we're actually asking companies to come up with climate leadership plans for their own company. And we actually have a whole bunch of support and resources for them in doing that. So we're helping people get there. We also have a benchmarking program, which is a very interesting program that allows us to start comparing buildings in Edmonton to each other in how much energy they actually consume. And so this is actually one of the first of its kind to be done at a municipal level in Canada, if not the first, I think, actually. And it's a very interesting program, so I highly suggest you look into it. So I am now going to essentially lead into Jenny's presentation by talking about what we're doing in the leading by example side of things. So we can ask a lot of Edmonton, but we can't ask a lot of Edmonton if we aren't doing it in our own buildings. So in May, we actually Well, actually, I'll give you a little background first. But in 2016, City Council directed administration to review and update our 2012 civic greenhouse gas management plan. So that's the buildings we operate. Think fire halls, libraries, pools, arenas, all of that type of stuff, right? Because the plan before, we weren't meeting our targets. And part of the reason was we underestimated growth in the city. If you can count the number of brand new rec facilities that we have in this facility on one hand, I'd be impressed. So we've actually done a lot of growth in the city that we hadn't accounted for. We also didn't focus as much as we probably should have on integration within the city. So this plan that was developed with the leadership of Jenny over the last 2 years really actually integrated so many different divisions at the city in a way that we've never done before, getting them to come to the table at the beginning saying, what are you actually willing to commit to in reducing our emissions? So it's very exciting that we've got this plan that we're moving forward with. In May 2018, just this May here, Council approved this plan. The plan says we're going to reduce our emissions by 50% below 2005 levels by 2030. And I would say that the more exciting part, they can approve a plan, but you can approve a plan and then not finance it. And the exciting thing is that with budget that just closed this fall, a significant portion of the first part of this plan has been financed by City Council. So they're behind it. They agree that we need to be taking these steps, including $16.5 million for solar, which is pretty exciting on our building. So Jenny will talk about that more. Great. I think that's it for me. And hand it back. Whoops. Great. Thank you.
Thanks again, Andrea. I'd like to now introduce Jenny Hong. Jenny's a Senior Project Manager with the Energy Transition Unit, also at the City of Edmonton. Her focus area is policies that advance energy efficiency and renewables within city operations. She has a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering and a master's degree in public health. Her experience includes leading waste management related capital construction projects and leading the development of environmental health related policies at Alberta Health. She calls herself, quote, an enthusiastic generalist and is passionate about using collaborative approaches to facilitate energy transition in our communities. Please welcome Jenny Hong.
Hi everyone, I work in the same unit as Andrea and Robin, and I just came back from a year of parental leave, so I might act a bit slow or stumble or something because of baby brain. If you don't believe in that phenomenon, it's real. It's so real. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how the City of Operations is going to implement solar, and some of you might have swam at this pool for free in the past couple of summers, and so they have both solar PV and solar thermal on this facility. I'm going to talk about solar as a part of the big picture of what the city is doing to manage greenhouse gas emissions in their own facilities and sites, touch a bit about how we're going to go about with procuring 100% green electricity for our city operations, and lastly, show you some, after we go through some of the boring stuff and technical stuff, show you some cool pictures and renderings of upcoming buildings that will have solar on it. So firstly, just to give you a bit of a background on how our GHG actually breaks down in civic operations, 50% of it goes to buildings, followed by transit fleet, followed by street lighting. So those are the top three. In terms of by fuel type, 60% of our GHG emissions comes from electricity use, 20% from natural gas, and the rest is from vehicle fuels. So in early 2017, our team started looking at a long-term greenhouse gas management plan to address the emissions created by our own city facilities and assets. And at first we wanted to set some bare minimum goals. So we wanted this plan to at minimum address, be in line with what the feds and the provinces are doing. So in 2016, the federal government worked or tried to work with all of the provinces and territories to come up with a pan-Canadian framework. At the end of it, 8 provinces, 3 territories signed on with the federal government, and the plan was going to help set interim targets for 2030. So it was hoping that if we can get our confederation going to hit some 2030 targets, then we can potentially keep on going and hit the 2050 targets. And for that, most of the developed countries in the world would be agreeing that you need to reduce your GHG emissions by 80% by 2050. So the pan-Canadian scenario was our bare minimum target, and it's 30% below 2005 GHG levels by 2030. And then, so we did some cost-benefit analysis to understand what types of options would be the most cost-effective and feasible. And we also wanted to create, a couple of more target scenarios with differing levels of capital and operating cost investments to help City Council with their decision-making. I don't have time to go through the cost-benefit analysis methodology, although I find it fascinating, but it's posted online, so you can ask me about where to get that afterwards. Anyway, so the main GHG reduction initiatives that were identified as already cost-effective and feasible, ready to go, are, most of you know this, building retrofits, solar PV, LED lighting, so in our case, LED street lighting is the biggest piece we could do. Electric buses, even with our current grid, electric buses, and that business case gets better and better as the grid greens. And then green electricity, followed by green natural gas and carbon offsets. And the green natural gas and carbon offsets were only used on the carbon neutral scenario, and there were really high uncertainties in the cost and availability of these products. For the first 2 scenarios, only the top 5 were incorporated in different levels of action. So our city council, they have been a very progressive council for a number of terms, and they wanted to do better than bare minimum of what Pan-Canadian Framework had committed to. So they actually went with an accelerated Pan-Canadian scenario target of 50% reduction by 2030, as Andrea mentioned. So that seems extreme, but really, what does that actually mean? So that means about 100 energy retrofits in average city buildings and facilities. It means installing 20 megawatts of solar in the next 12 years. So all of these are by 2030, what are we going to do? It means purchasing 440 electric buses, almost 50,000 streetlight replacements, and 100% green electricity. So what does that mean? We found that it was going to cost $340 million in capital investments plus about $8 million, give or take, in operating. That seems like a lot, but the net present value at the end of the day is still positive in several tens of millions of dollars. And another piece is every year or every budget term we spend, our next capital budget cycle is $4 billion for just 4 years. And our operating budget's about $2 billion. Actually, I can't remember if it's for 1 year or 4 years, but you can see that relative to $340 million over 12 years, it's a very low percentage of all of the different types of services that we provide. So this just quickly goes through how we allocate the carbon reductions in each type of interventions. So at the end of the day, actually, about 2/3 is related to energy efficiency and conservation and on-site renewables, and one third is from restricting our use of energy or displacing energy with on-site renewables, and 2/3 is related to green electricity. And so the recent budget approved the ones in green, the building retrofit, the solar PV, and the LED street lighting, and the green electricity and electric buses are in progress. In addition to the $16 million for new solar PV on city buildings that were approved, prior to this, when we didn't know what was going to happen with the long-term greenhouse gas management plan, back in 2016, 2017, we worked on a new city policy, and this new policy for new city buildings had this really exciting and ambitious 3-metric energy standard that some of you were involved in during the consultation process, but we called it the 40-40-80. So we had committed that new city buildings, like new city fire halls, libraries, police stations, rec centers, we would aim to do bare minimum 40% better energy savings than the current energy code. We would do 40% better GHG savings than the current energy code. And we also introduced a more not a relative, but an absolute metric of restricting the annual heating demand. So the annual heating demand speaks to the quality of the building envelope. So the better your building envelope is, the lower that value would be. So in addition to the 40-40-80, we introduced a 1% requirement for on-site solar generation. So some of you have heard of the 1% for public art, and this policy introduced a 1% project capital dedicated to on-site energy generation. And this level of investment through our analysis had shown that it would be equivalent to a solar PV system for a typical building that could offset 4% to 12% of a new building's energy use. So maybe for libraries and office buildings, it would be closer to the 12-15%, but for a rec center or something that's more energy intensive, like inherently more energy intensive, it would be closer to 4% or maybe less per 1% of your project capital. So this new policy alone, without the 16 million for everything, would result in 7 megawatts, approximately 7 megawatts of installed capacity in 12 years. Some of these are under construction, under design, so I don't have renderings, but I'm going to show some more pictures in a couple of slides from now of different projects. Yeah, so there's going to be a new police fire range that has a nice big roof that will have solar. There's some transit facilities and ops types of facilities that will be very amenable to nice rooftop solar, and some cultural facilities and rec centers as well. Okay, so this just summarizes some of the things I've already said. In addition to these, in addition to the 16.5 million and the 1% for project capital, we're going to be implementing more enhanced tracking of energy savings and harvesting utility savings from the energy retrofits, the on-site solar, and being able to put those savings towards more green projects in the coming budgets. So again, why do we care about 100% green electricity? So going back to the pie chart, 60% of our electricity is from, 60% of our GHG emissions is from electricity. And we currently have a really intensive, carbon-intensive grid. So if we can use 100% green electricity, like BC or Manitoba, then that portion is, poof, just gone. Okay, so how does that work, right? So green electricity is generated through no or low carbon sources, such as wind, solar PV, or biomass. And they all share the same grid. So it's not like we can really guarantee that a power plant, wind is coming just for the wind-powered electrons is just going to come to City of Edmonton. But we're all on the same grid. So how does it work? How can we take credit? How can we take credit to say we have 100% green electricity? So, renewable energy certificates are specialized financial instruments in Alberta that represents one verified carbon emissions reduction has occurred. One REC confirms that 1 megawatt hour of electricity was generated from an eligible renewable energy source, and it's been fed into the grid. And this REC, it's decoupled from the actual electricity that you're buying, and it's a separate type of commodity. So what's interesting is if we don't buy the REC, we don't get to claim that it's a part of our, don't get to claim that credit against our inventory. So the REC, it's a financial instrument, and it's an instrument that a power generator can commodify that's decoupled from the electricity. And it helps, it's really important because right now wind and solar still picking up. So having REC, it helps incentivize and improve the business case. It helps the generators to get capital to build wind or solar farms, like large utility stuff, because they need it for financing and whatnot. So currently the problem is the city buys these RECs and claims that we have some green electricity, but we buy it year to year. They're eco-certified, they're legit, but they're from existing wind or biomass facilities that have been running for maybe 10, 15, 20 years. So City Council, when they looked at how we currently claim that we have, green electricity powering some of our city assets, they would say, well, did you really move the curve? Like, what else has happened? So we couldn't really, in some respects, we couldn't say, yeah, we've helped the market improve, because they're from existing facilities. So City Council, through this greenhouse gas management plan, is really pushing us to do a different strategy, to do long-term REC purchases tied to new facilities where we really can claim, because of the city's additional support and contract and guarantee, these RECs would have not occurred. These new wind-powered or solar-powered electrons through the shared grid is because of our efforts. And so the next steps are, we're going to go back to council in a few months. Another project manager from our shop is going to outline some procurement options, such as if the contract's only going to be RECs only, or if it's going to be RECs attached to our electricity service contract. It could be structured like a contract for difference, which is really similar to what the province's electricity procurement program has been doing, which has had like really good pricing if you've been following it in the news. And so that's coming to council in coming months. We're going to be, so once we get approval, we can proceed with the RFP, and hopefully we can achieve 100% green electricity from new facilities or facility, depending on what the RFP results are like, in not this budget cycle, but the next one, starting in 2023. So finally, this is what you guys came for, to see some cool solar projects. So you might be fascinated to know that this could be the Windermere Fire Station. I think the final design might not be as crazy as this, but it is something cool and pitchy. Like when I first saw it, I'm like, it looks like a witch's hat. So the building envelope is going to be excellent. The bay doors, usually bay doors are really bad at insulating, especially the roll-up doors, and these are going to be quick bifolding doors that can open and close, and they insulate a lot better. And there's going to be 120 kilowatts of installed capacity, and in this rendering you can also see that there's going to be geothermal heating, cooling. Those are the pipes going into the ground. And it's also going to be our only net zero energy pilot in the city right now. But when there's one, there's going to be more, and so we're going to learn and see what else we can do that's net zero in the future. And some of you might have heard that the atrium glazing is getting replaced over the Edmonton Convention Center. And so part of it, actually a large part, the south-facing slope, and also some of the sides, is going to have integrated solar PV right into the glazing. Some of you might have seen things like this at U of A campus. All of the solar at U of A campus, I believe, is still not rooftop. It's all like building integrated stuff, so that's cool. This is the new Kathleen Andrews transit garage. It's replacing another aged garage that was built in the 60s. It's going to be huge, going to be housing 300 buses. Those tall vertical protrusions are called roof lanterns, and they're meant to bring, instead of skylight, they're meant to bring diffuse natural light into the workspaces and part of the second floor. So it's not running throughout the whole width of the building. This is another rendering. So it's going to be built in the former site of a Canada Packers plant, and there's that 50-meter tall smokestack that's going to be a part of the historic, remembrance of it. And we're still working on, so it's being built already, and it's being built solar ready. And we did that in anticipation of hoping that there would be a big pot of solar PV money from this 4-year cycle. So because of that approval, we're hoping to get, around 1 megawatt on this garage. And then this is going to be that fancy Lewis Farm Rec Center in the southwest. It's going to be a rec center, a library. It's going to be an academic center with Edmonton Catholic School District, and also a surrounding park complex. And this was in the news a lot. The design is complete and it's waiting approval, and this will also have solar. Yeah,
Thank you, Jenny. Our final speaker is Robin Webb, who is also a senior project manager with the Energy Transition Unit at the city. Her focus area is residential energy efficiency, renewable energy, and the low carbon economy. She has a master's degree in urban planning, and her background is in community development and sustainability. Her passions are creating sustainable cities and the path to a low carbon future, and teaching the public, all of us, about household energy efficiency. So please welcome Robin Webb.
Hi everyone. So for the last part of our presentation, we're going to switch gears from what the city has been doing on our own buildings and with our own operations budget, and look a little bit more at what we're doing to help you adopt solar on your homes and in businesses throughout the city. So the projects that I'm going to talk about today are mostly managed under the banner of Change Homes for Climate. So I'll talk mostly about the solar aspect of this, but then before we leave today, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an announcement of a new energy efficiency project that we're also launching in the next couple of weeks. So as Jenny showed you some of those charts and pie graphs for our city operations greenhouse gas management plan, the ones that I'm showing you here are actually from our community inventory of emissions. So this is all of the energy that we use in our homes and in our transportation habits every day. So if we look at this graph, again, we see, very starkly that electricity only accounts for about 16% of the energy that's used in Edmonton. But again, it's about 40% of the emissions that are created. So logically, any plan that the city had to address emissions in the residential sector had to include something that was going to deal with electricity. Also, just to give you a little bit of context, this is where emissions actually come from in Edmonton. So industry accounts for about 16%. But you can see that residential buildings, the ones that we live in, account for about 20% of our inventory as well. So another big piece of the pie that needs to be accounted for. In June of last year, the City of Edmonton formed a partnership with Energy Efficiency Alberta. Energy Efficiency Alberta is the crown corporation that was recently created by the provincial government and that gets a portion of the carbon levy. And they had previously launched an incentive program for solar PV in the province. The city, we were really excited about this program, but we also felt like we wanted to accelerate the adoption of solar in Edmonton. So we decided to put an additional top-up onto the existing provincial rebate. So for residential solar installations in Edmonton, we added an extra 15 cents per watt to the already existing, at the time, 75 cents a watt that Energy Efficiency Alberta was offering to projects throughout the province. Since then, Energy Efficiency Alberta has actually decided to increase the residential rate to 90 cents a watt across the province. So all of a sudden, that's meant that if you live in Edmonton and you're interested in putting solar on your house, you're going to get $1.05 a watt. And so some of our analysis has showed that that's about 40% of the upfront cost of residential solar in Edmonton. It's a pretty sizable investment right now. Right now, the city's program is just for residential solar. Compared to the other levels of government, we operate with quite a slim budget. So the decision was made in our office that there was a better business case in a lot of cases for industrial or commercial solar projects, and we wanted to really help residents out with what some people perceived as a very long payback for residential solar still. But again, that provincial rebate fortunately still applies to other projects in the commercial and industrial sector. One of the things that we were very excited about being able to do with the city project is actually to create one application process for both the provincial and city rebates. So right now, if you're interested in putting solar on your home, in most cases, an installer is actually going to fill out that application form for you. but we didn't duplicate the number of things that they had to fill out in order for you to participate in the city's program. And that was a real win for us because, again, we were trying to reduce the amount of burden that would be put on our solar sector here in Edmonton, especially given that the incentive for the city is a smaller portion of what is being offered. Another thing that we worked on as part of creating excitement and interest in amongst Edmontonians in the adoption of solar is creating this solar potential map. So we worked with an Alberta-based company called MyHeat to create this. Just to provide some clarity, MyHeat also has another service that they offer where they do heat loss maps for different cities. So you'll also be able to find a heat loss map for Edmonton, but that's different than the solar potential one. This is to give you an idea of sort of the cursory suitability of your home for solar. That being said, we tested the map out with a number of the installers in the community, and it is definitely going to have some variability based on what an installer is actually going to give you in a quote when they come out and visit your home. But we wanted to give people an easy tool just to see if you go on and it's saying that your home is not ideal, it's probably not best to then call up an installer and to get a quotation done at that point in time. However, it's a really fun map to play with, so go and check it out. The URL is just at the bottom there. As Andrea mentioned earlier, we've also been putting a lot of money into our marketing campaigns under that Change for Climate lens. We've been doing lots of paid advertising, going to things like home shows, doing lots of outreach, including an event like this tonight. But we're really, really committed to the idea of Edmontonians understanding the benefit of putting solar on their homes. We're also interested in creating social norms. So I brought one of the little signs with me. It's sitting in the front here. We've created lawn signs for both of our programs. I'm just going to say the one that you can see on the side for our EnerGuide program, that program won't exist in a few weeks because we're launching a new one. But we have a number of customers that have participated in the solar program to date, putting these signs on their lawn, letting the public in Edmonton know that they put solar on their roof, especially if it isn't visible from the street. We're trying to make this seem like this is a normal thing to do within our city and to give more of a platform to the early adopters and the people who have been doing this work to support emissions reduction in Edmonton. We've also had a really long-standing partnership with the Solar Energy Society of Alberta. The city has been contracting them for about 3 to 4 years to provide Solar PV 101 workshops to Edmontonians. So some of you may have attended those over the years. They were, in the beginning, we were getting hundreds of people out to them, which was really exciting to us. And Rob Harlan, the former executive director, would go through about 3 to 4 hours, actually, of the basics of solar, how you hire a contractor, all of those different things. We're committed to working with CISA in the future to continue offering that education because we feel like our industry association is the best group to be able to offer that. So looking at the impact, so again, we said that we launched in June of last year. To date, we've seen 173 participants go through our program, and there are currently 309 pending applications. We saw a nice little spike after Energy Efficiency Alberta launched that top-up to the 90 cents a watt, so that's really exciting for us. We also crunched some numbers to look at what the average price per installed watt was amongst the different participants in the program, and it was looking like $2.70 was the average. So there would be some projects that would come in over and some under. Also, the average residential system size is about 8.2 kilowatts, and the average price that we were seeing was around $20,000. Just to give you a little bit of context, the beginning of this graph is in 2010. So we really wanted to be able to show you the exponential growth that's been happening in solar, with solar in Edmonton over the years. This graph here is showing the connected capacity and the energy supplied to the grid. It's for both residential and commercial, but again, just a lovely sort of exponential growth curve that makes us really happy. And we're committed to updating this every month too. So you can go onto our website, and we have a nice dynamic site that will continue to upgrade these numbers over time. The impact from a greenhouse gas emission perspective is over the lifetime of a system, we're seeing about 135 tons of greenhouse gas emissions are reduced per home. That would be about the equivalent of taking 28 cars off the road for a year. So if we're looking at the usable lifespan of a solar system, you know, in some ways you could say that it would zero out the average person's driving for a year, if you wanted to think of another way of how that might work. We've also been doing a little bit of mapping about where solar is actually being installed. So it looks like the Southwest is doing quite well. And it's not surprising to us that some of the darker numbers are in some of the newer communities where we have some home builders in Edmonton that are committed to putting a net zero model of their home on the market, or some of these homes were built to be solar ready to begin with. We're going to make a slight tweak to the program going forward, and we're actually going to ask participants to commit to having just a little star placed over where their system is. So again, we'll start, this is aggregated by postal code here. Soon we'll actually be able to see where each individual installation is. So another initiative that we've been hard at work on with the City of Edmonton is working on a PACE program. So PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And it has been in place in the US and other regions of Canada for quite a long time. The goal of PACE is to allow for affordable financing for homeowners so that they're not facing that big barrier of a large upfront investment. An act to enable clean energy improvements was passed by the province, and that actually set the stage for municipal governments such as the City of Edmonton to actually establish a PACE program. So right now, members of our team are actually working on creating documentation for council so that we could actually pass a bylaw so that Edmonton can enact its own PACE program. We're going to, again, be working with Energy Efficiency Alberta, who will be the program administrator on the city's behalf. So in this case, property owners are going to be able to get access to that financing, and they're going to be able to pay it back on their property taxes. So a few slight details about that. The outstanding amount can also be paid off at any point in time. So if someone does put their house for sale and the new buyer is not interested in assuming the PACE loan, they can pay it out before the term is up. However, if the new owner is all right with that idea, the repayments will remain with the property, and that new owner would continue paying them over time. So again, you can see how that would sort of lower the barrier to entry for things like solar that have a long-term payback of, let's say, 15 to 20 years, but you're not sure if you would be staying in your home over that period of time. This is an instrument that allows for that transfer. So the city is looking for a fall 2019 launch of the PACE program. We're lucky here in Edmonton. We're actually going to be the first and only municipality in Alberta to be part of a pilot. So you as residents will have access to this hopefully in the fall of 2019 if everything goes well. A little bit about the different types of projects that would be eligible for PACE financing. So it broadly covers energy efficiency, water conservation, and on-site renewables. So again, things like solar, but it could also be upgraded installation, windows and doors, all of your HVAC equipment, like heating and cooling systems. And a limitation of the program here, though, will be that it'll be available to residential and commercial properties and not to industrial ones. So just sort of tying into that discussion on PACE, our hope is that people who want to participate in the PACE program and actually get financing to cover the cost of a renewable energy project or an energy efficiency upgrade will partake in our rebate programs first. So for instance, with solar, you'd have the overall cost of your project reduced by 40%, then that remaining 60 is what you could get financed under PACE. Additionally, this is the program that I was talking about that we're going to be launching. It's another partnership with Energy Efficiency Alberta. It's called the Home Energy Plan. So for residents in Edmonton, we're also going to be giving you a top-up, again, on the rates that they're offering for different energy efficiency programs. So the Home Energy Plan was launched province-wide in November. In about 2 weeks, you're going to have further access to more money, again, for those same things: home heating systems, insulation, windows, tankless hot water heaters. But the way that this will be slightly different than the programs that Energy Efficiency Alberta had in the past is they're actually going to be using EnerGuide as a benchmarking system. So an energy advisor is going to come in, they're going to assess the energy performance of your house, which you're seeing here on the EnerGuide label, where we're seeing that this house uses 134 gigajoules of energy per year. They're also going to give you a renovation report. So that renovation report is going to feed into an online portal. So if it said, windows, insulation, and a new furnace, the portal is going to show you the different amounts of rebates that you could get for those different things. And again, if you're in Edmonton, it's automatically going to calculate that additional top-up for what the city's giving for you. So again, just to hit home, efficiency first, followed by renewables. Let's increase our demand, and then you can put a smaller solar system on afterwards. You can use the existing solar rebate programs and the Home Energy Plan, and then hopefully in the fall of 2019, you'll be able to use PACE to round out the additional amount if you require financing for those projects. So we're hoping that you're starting to see the picture of how all of these things sort of feed together. So I think we're going to accept questions now, but for all of us as well, too.
Yeah, we're going to set up the tables first.
Oh, sure.
What we'll do is just take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
Grab a drink, and then we'll come back for Q&A. Okay, let's begin. Do we have any questions for our panelists? And when you ask your question, you'll have to turn on the microphone. That way, the folks that are watching on the net can hear your question.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question for Andrea and Jenny. So when you guys are talking about the renewable energy goals for Edmonton, those mainly apply to city operations, right? So, yeah. So how are you guys or what kind of influence does the city have on, commercial players or residential home builders and stuff? Because if you just reduce city operations, that's great, but without involving other people, then emissions could still potentially rise.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Robin spoke to a bunch of the residential stuff, so I'll let her touch on that. But when it comes to commercial, we actually have another project manager who works on our change buildings for climate portfolio of things, and those are two of the programs that I briefly touched on. So what we're doing is we're working from a few different angles. One of them is the energy benchmarking program that we have that's available, and a big piece of that there is to actually have companies in Edmonton start to understand what they're actually consuming, because you can't start saving energy until you actually understand how much you have to start you're actually consuming to start with. So that's one of the first ones, and actually that program is doing phenomenally well. I think we have almost 200 participants this year, and that's growing. We have more and more buildings that are adding their buildings to our portfolio of buildings. The report for the last year of participation will be out this spring, and we actually have a building energy benchmarking report on our website, which is very interesting read that has the details about that. So that's one thing. We're starting to engage and have that discussion with community members at that level. Another big picture piece of the puzzle is our corporate climate leaders program, and that's the one that I mentioned, where we have some of the biggest companies in Edmonton are actually part of the pilot group of companies. And what we're, I don't know if Stephanie's still here, but she's helping run the program right now for the city. But essentially that program is asking people to actually do a full analysis of how much they're emitting and come up with a plan the same way that we did corporately to reduce our emissions for the businesses in the city of Edmonton, and commit to sharing that information where they can to help make a difference. So we do have programs there as well. And we're definitely still, we're looking at opportunities for incentive programs as well on the commercial side of things. So those are some of them. We also have a energy transition group that meets quarterly. That is, I think I've seen a lot of your faces there before, where we're actually, the leaders in energy transition in Edmonton are sitting down and talking about the next steps. And so the corporate community is often very engaged in that as well. I'll let Robin talk about, maybe Jenny has something to add.
Right, so some of the members of the corporate leadership group, yeah, they're really big energy users. Like I believe, Alberta Health Services has signed on, so that's huge, right? That's across Alberta. And then some of the major post-secondary institutions, so not just like, green companies, they're huge public institutions or companies that are wanting to understand their GHG footprint.
And I guess other than some of the residential programs that we mentioned earlier, where we have incentives for any resident of Edmonton for things like solar and also for energy efficiency, we also didn't mention some of the other programs that the city either funds or projects that you can apply to. For the last 5 years, we've had a community grant program called EcoCity Edmonton. And for a long time, EcoCity Edmonton was one of the only programs that was funding a lot of the solar installations here in Edmonton, although the vast majority of them are on not-for-profit or educational institutions, because that's the basis of that program. We still saw that those projects were being used as demonstration projects in communities. We also sponsor a program that's a partnership with the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues called Green Leagues. So they have their very own coordinator that helps community leagues with their energy efficiency and renewable energy projects too, but also with public education. So Andrea, for instance, sits on the sustainability committee of her community league, and they do public education sessions, not unlike what we're doing tonight to try to spread the word. So there's that outreach and engagement part, but then also a program like EcoCity will actually give funding to community groups to do these sorts of projects. But again, then we have our solar incentive program for homeowners and this home energy plan that's going to be launching in a couple weeks.
Oh yeah, my name's Guy here. I was just wondering for Robin that you were discussing about the EnerGuide aspects that you're coming up with on different programs. Is that going to be similar to what they have, energy efficiency has with the commercial buildings and that, where you have the different aspects for heating, water, and insulation, those kind of things? And will that application be put online so a person can download it and review it?
Yes, yeah. So you can actually apply to the home energy plan right now, but if you're in Edmonton, I would suggest you wait those couple weeks, because then there'll be a top-up. But when the EnerGuide Energy Evaluator, so EnerGuide was a program that was started by Natural Resources Canada about 25 years ago, I guess, and so they certify energy advisors that are going to come and do an evaluation of your home. They're going to look at your building envelope, at your heating and air conditioning systems. So, and they do a blower door or depressurization test where they're looking for air leakage. All of these things together go into modeling software, which comes up with that score that I showed later. So each of your houses would have your own individual score of how you're performing, but also your own individualized roadmap of the different things that you should do. And for some of the people who have already done a lot of those upgrades to their home already, you can also ask your energy advisor to model a solar PV system into your report just to see how it would reduce your gigajoules, but the rebate for that would come from the solar program, not from the home energy plan.
Hey, thank you for the presentations. They were great. A question for Robin. Those figures that you had on the GHG emissions from Edmonton that was not the municipal, are those figures available online anywhere? And then also about the PACE program, is that hinging on any of the carbon levy stuff for the future? And if that for some reason falls out, will the PACE program still exist and be funded by the City of Edmonton, or is it needing some of that backup?
That's a very good question. The answer to the first one, yeah, all of the pie charts that I showed about where emissions in Edmonton come from are actually part of the energy transition strategy. So you can find that online, and we're actually working on an update to it right now. So we'll have updated numbers about the different categories. Yes, I guess Energy Efficiency Alberta, like I said, is funded through the carbon levy, and I think it's incumbent upon the people in the room to maybe ask, if you're concerned about this, to ask candidates from different parties about where they stand on a price on carbon. I think what we saw in Ontario was, a government was elected that didn't have, they didn't support carbon pricing, and there was an agency similar to energy efficiency in Alberta in Ontario that had just been launched that was nixed within the first month. So I know many of the solar installers in the room have been having this conversation with their clients, but I'd really encourage you, if you're interested, to get quotes and sign up today. They can come out and do an assessment in the winter, and if you want to get on a list for projects early in the spring, that would be my advice. However, from the city's perspective, we have a long-term commitment of 3 years for both of the projects that I've talked about, but because there are partnerships with Energy Efficiency Alberta, we're going to have to really sit back and figure out what we would do afterwards.
Can I clarify PACE as well? Because some people might not be familiar, but yeah, there's a cost administrating PACE, and so EEA as administrator of how that mechanism works, that being paid back through your property tax, but the larger portion it's not like interest-free loan that goes through your property tax. It's still, there's going to be, there's going to be interest, right, if you choose to use PACE. So it won't be for everyone. It'll be for people that choose to not want to do upfront investment.
And I really hope that the city would look, if it was possible for us to administrate the PACE program on our own, should the identified partner cease to exist anymore.
Thank you for your presentations. Robin, is there more or less pushback from neighbors of people trying to put solar onto their house?
You know what, that's a really interesting question. I haven't heard, personally, I haven't received any phone calls as the program administrator about it. I'm looking at some of the installers in the room. You guys aren't hearing very much about it either? Okay. The only problem that we're hearing about is sometimes in newer neighborhoods, there's a restrictive covenant that's been put on the whole development about things like what color your house can be, what types of shingles you can use, and that is part of your purchaser agreement when you buy within that area. So unfortunately, the city has no control over that too. But there's been a movement within certain neighborhoods that have those standards. Some of them say they don't accept solar. There's been a movement to try to change some of those. I guess it's a homeowners association that regulates them for those neighborhoods. So there's been a movement to change that. But again, that's the extent that I've heard to which, it hasn't been neighbors that have been upset. It's been architectural guidelines for a neighborhood that actually say that you can't do that if you live within this neighborhood. However, many of them were written so long ago where solar wasn't even a consideration too.
Well, I enjoyed your presentations very much. I understand that California is going to require solar homes after 2020. All new homes have to be solar. Is there any chance we're going to get that in Alberta?
I hate to pass the buck on this one, but building code is held by the province. We, as a city, did get big city charter powers recently, along with Calgary, that would enable us to potentially take control over the building code for Edmonton, where we could surpass what the provincial code is. But at this point in time, that would have to be the province that would have to make a decision like that. So advocate to your MLA for that as well too.
I just want to also mention this gentleman was one of the founding members of the Solar Energy Society in 1975.
Nice to meet you.
Great, thank you.
Hi, at the back. If a person were able to afford their own financing for their solar on their home, they would pay a certain interest rate, there'd be a payback period for that. Would they be better off being part of the PACE program? Are there any financial advantages if they could do either or?
I guess it's really that property tied element of the financing, basically. That if you had a long-term plan to stay in your home over the term where you would pay back the investment, then you can choose which one of the factors would work for you the best. I think it's that property tied element that makes it more lucrative for residential homeowners. However, I'm sure Lee would like to speak a whole bunch more about this. Lee is part of a group called PACE Alberta, an advocacy group that's been working very hard to get the legislation passed as well. But in the commercial context, it's quite a bit different because the borrowing doesn't go on the balance sheet of the company that's borrowing it. That's not much of a consideration for a homeowner. Lee, do you want to say anything else? Okay. Lee is wearing sort of a beige sweater right there if you want to talk to him afterwards. Because right now there is financing for solar from different financial institutions like ATB in the market right now. So.
Yeah, so this is for the solar installers where when we hear that the PACE, which is an awesome program, I'm glad that Edmonton is moving forward with that, but being done in the fall kind of misses a whole season right before the election that we could really show what solar could do. And
we have lots of statutory limitations on the process and the public consultations around creating bylaws. So it's basically, unfortunately, we've said to Energy Efficiency Alberta and the province, you have to give us information by this time, then we have to have a public hearing for this amount of time. It has to go to different series of readings. So summer at the soonest, unfortunately. We're quite aware of the constraint, but we can't do anything about the...
Well, I know Lee, and maybe Lee can speak to this, was talking about how that it could be done, that retroactive, some sort of retroactive thing that could be done to kind of help alleviate that. I don't know if, like I say, that might be something where we just send everybody, have a little seminar with Lee there, but...
Yeah, I don't know if the legislation allowed for retroactivity. Lee is shaking his head. I didn't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Again, this was, the city and the province both had to partner on the creation of the legislation, so we all had to come to consensus on what would go into it and what would stay.